Hello, cats and kitties. It's Terry Lee here with another true crime story for you. Today we're going to talk about Joseph Paul Franklin. Now, Joseph Paul Franklin was not his birth name. We'll get to that in just a minute. But Joseph Paul Franklin he was a man of many talents, none of them good. He was a sniper. He was an attempted assassin. He was a bomber. He was basically a homegrown domestic terrorist, kind of a one-man crusader, if you will. So let's learn a little bit about Joseph Paul Franklin. For that, I'm going to need my glasses. Okay, he was born James Clayton Vaughn Jr. on April the 13th, 1950 in Mobile, Alabama. He was the eldest son of James Clayton Vaughn Sr. and Helen Rao Vaughn. His father was a World War II veteran, he was a butcher by trade, and he was also a raging alcoholic. And he would leave the family for weeks, if not months, and when he came back would be physically abusive to his children. Helen, the mother, was strict and overbearing, and she was also physically abusive to the children. And Franklin would say later on that oftentimes he and his siblings did not have enough to eat. So I think they had enough to eat, she just didn't give them enough to eat. So that's his childhood growing up. Not unusual, it's a rough childhood. We see that a lot with true crime stories. Okay, a little bit more of the background of Joseph Paul Franklin. In high school, he was a poor student. And at some point in high school, he had an accident, and I never could really find out what this accident was, but it affected his eyesight. It caused a visual impairment, and that in turn caused him to be exempt from the Vietnam War draft. So he got out of the draft because of this visual impairment. He married twice, once in 1968 when he would have been 18 to Bobby Lee Dorman, and then again in 1979, when he would have been 29, to Anita Carden. Both marriages were short. He was married to Bobby Lee for 4 months. He was married to Anita for 1 year. He was physically abusive to both of his wives. Not terribly surprising given his childhood. Okay, here's where things get interesting for Joseph Paul Franklin. During his teens, he came into contact with neo-Nazis. He joined the Socialist White People's Party, which is now known as the American Nazi Party, and he also joined the segregationist movement. After moving to Atlanta, he joined the National States' Rights Party and also the Ku Klux Klan, or the KKK. Now, Franklin actually disliked most of these organizations because he felt that they were all talk and no action. He felt like things needed to be done. And to that effect, he began harassing interracial couples in public to the point where he actually maced an interracial couple. He also wrote a letter to President Jimmy Carter threatening him over his pro-civil rights views. So, yeah, great guy. In 1976, and I'm assuming after he wrote the letter to Jimmy Carter, because you would think that the Secret Service would be all over that, but by that time he had changed his name. He changed his name to Joseph Paul Franklin in honor of Paul Joseph Goebbels, who was the Nazi Prime Minister of Propaganda, or Nazi Minister of Propaganda during World War II, so great guy. And he also took the name Franklin in honor of Benjamin Franklin, who I'm sure would be thrilled to know that his name was associated with Joseph Paul Franklin. After reading a copy of Hitler's Mein Kampf, he decided that he needed to start a race war so that things would actually start happening to promote the white race. He also was inspired by Charles Manson's Helter Skelter. For those of you that know the Charles Manson story, you'll know that he believed that there needed to be a race war called Helter Skelter. And so he was also inspired by Charles Manson. Great heroes there. From 1977 to 1980, Franklin was a drifter across the South and the Midwest. He changed his name frequently, dyed his hair frequently, changed cars frequently, and he survived by robbing banks and getting paid for blood donation at blood banks. He began, like I said, a one-man crusade to eliminate inferior people, which he considered blacks and Jews to be. So he's got a mission now, kind of a scary one. So, what were his crimes? His crimes were many and varied, and we're going to go over them by year because he got an amazing amount accomplished each year, sadly. In 1977, on July the 25th, he detonated a bomb outside of Jewish lobbyist and attorney and executive director of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, Morris J. Amity. So let me say that again because that was a mouthful. He detonated a bomb outside of Morris J. Amity's house, who was a lobbyist and an attorney and the director of the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee. Thankfully, this took place in Rockville, Maryland, and thankfully the family escaped. However, their family dog was killed, so that was sad. On July the 29th, so here we are just 4 days later, he firebombed and just obliterated the Beth Shalom Synagogue in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Amazingly, no one was injured, so that was good, but the building itself was destroyed. On August the 7th of 1977, he shot an interracial couple, Alphonse Manning Jr. and Tony Schwinn, in a parking lot in Madison, Wisconsin. So now you see how he is just traveling around continuously. He's gone from Rockville, Maryland to Chattanooga, Tennessee to Madison, Wisconsin. In October, he shot people attending a service at a St. Louis, Missouri synagogue, and Gerald Gordon, 42 years old, was killed. In 1978, on February the 2nd, Franklin shot an interracial couple, Johnny Brookshire and his wife, Joy Williams. Johnny was killed, Joy was wounded. March 6, from Franklin's confession, although he was never charged with this, Franklin shot Hustler publisher Larry Flint, and his lawyer Gene Reeves in Lawrenceville, Georgia. And he said he did it because Hustler magazine depicted interracial sex. For those of you who don't know, Hustler was basically a pornographic magazine that was, I don't know if it's still out today. I don't know if they're still publishing it, but it was popular in the 70s and 80s. And Larry Flint was the publisher. And Flint was left permanently paralyzed, permanently disabled by this shooting. On July the 29th, in Chattanooga, he shot and killed William Bryant Tatum, a black man, and wounded Nancy Hilton, his white girlfriend. So as you can tell, interracial couples are really a target of this person, generally black men and white women. In 1979, on July the 12th, he shot and killed Harold McIver, a black Taco Bell manager in Doraville, Georgia, for being in close contact with a white woman. Now, that's basically what the source said. I don't know if it means he was hanging out with her, if he was dating her. Not entirely sure, but it was too close for Joseph Paul Franklin's liking. On August the 18th of 1979, Franklin shot and killed Raymond Taylor, a 28-year-old black man in a Falls Church, Virginia Burger King. On October the 21st, he killed interracial couple Jesse Taylor and Marion Brossett at an Oklahoma City shopping center. So now we're in Oklahoma City. We came there from Falls Church. He really does get around. On December the 5th of 1979, he shot 15-year-old sex worker Mercedes Lynn Master, who he had been living with in DeKalb County, Georgia. He said he shot her because she had black customers. 1980, on January the 12th, he shot a black man, Lawrence Reese, and on January the 14th, he shot a black man, Lee Watkins. Both of these were in Indianapolis. On May the 3rd, he shot a young white hitchhiker, Rebecca Bergstrom, and dumped her body in Tomah, Wisconsin. On May the 29th, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, civil rights activist and Urban League president Vernon Jordan was shot and wounded while he was with a white woman. Franklin was acquitted for this crime, but he later confessed to it, and he also confessed to planning to kill civil rights activist Julian Pond. On June the 8th, he shot and killed two black males, Darrell Lane and his cousin Dante Evans Brown, from an overpass in Cincinnati. He was actually looking for an interracial couple to shoot, and instead he saw these two young black males and decided to go with that instead. June the 15th of 1980, he shot interracial couple Arthur Smothers and Kathleen McCullough in Johnston, Pennsylvania. On June the 25th, in Pocahontas County, West Virginia, he picked up two white hitchhikers, Nancy Santamero and Vicky Duran, and killed both. He said he killed them because one of them said she had a black boyfriend. August the 20th, 1980, he shot Ted Fields and David Martin, two black joggers that were leaving a Salt Lake City park with their white female friends. Okay, so that's a detailed countdown of the crimes that he has either been charged with or has confessed to at a later date. After the murders in Salt Lake City, Franklin traveled to the South, and he was stopped in Kentucky concerning a firearm in his car, and because he had racist tattoos, they thought he might be the sniper they were looking for. He fled, but his racist tattoos and the gun and his habit of visiting blood banks led the police to believe that he might be the sniper that they were looking for. So they did a really smart thing, the authorities. They sent a bolo, be on the lookout, for racist tattoos to blood banks around the country, looking for a man with racist tattoos. And wouldn't you know it, a worker at a Lakeland, Florida blood bank recognized Franklin's tattoos, and she called the FBI. And he was arrested in Lakeland on October the 28th, 1980. So, just 2 months after his last killing. In 1981, he was extradited back to Salt Lake City, where he received life sentences for killing Fields and Martin. He was sentenced to the federal maximum security prison in Marion, Illinois. And if you know anything about the Marion, Illinois prison, it was where the big boys went, the bad guys. He was repeatedly attacked by black inmates. There's a shock. In 1986, Franklin confesses to several crimes, including the murders of Alphonse Manning and Tony Schwinn in Wisconsin, and he receives 2 consecutive life sentences for that. So now he's up to 4 life sentences. In 1997, he was sentenced to death for the murder of Gerald Gordon in Missouri when he had been shooting outside of the synagogue. And he was moved to a prison in Bonne Terre, and I am guessing on that pronunciation, Missouri. Also in 1997, he was sentenced to 40 years of imprisonment for killing Darrell Lane and Dante Brown, the 2 young men that he killed from the overpass in Cincinnati. So, let's see, he has 4 life sentences, he has a death sentence, and he has a 40-year sentence, which is basically a life sentence. In 1998, he was sentenced to life for the murder of William Tatum, and Franklin was also, at that point, executed on November 20th of 2013. Now, there were a lot of things that were tried to prevent his execution. For one thing, it was delayed due to the method of the execution, which was they were going to use a different method. Usually in execution, there was a 3-drug cocktail, is what they called it. This time, they were only going to use 1 drug. It was pentobarbital, and that is a sedative and anticonvulsant, and they were going to give him a lethal amount of that by injection, and that was how he was going to be killed. And there was some, his lawyers and some other people were saying that this was cruel and unusual punishment, therefore it was unconstitutional. That was overruled. Larry Flint, the publisher of Hustler, the one that was permanently disabled by the shooting, asked for clemency because he believed that the government should not be in the business of killing people. He was opposed to the death penalty, and he asked for clemency for Franklin, and that was denied. So on November the 20th, 2013, some 15 years after he was sentenced to life for the murder of William Tatum, and some 16 years after he was sentenced to death for the murder of Gerald Gordon, at Eastern Reception Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bonne Terre, Missouri, he was executed. He had no final statement before he was executed. But 3 days before his execution, he gave a final statement to a local newspaper. He said he had renounced his racist views and he now thought that black people were, and I quote, people just like us, unquote. Which leads you to think that he wasn't thinking of them as people, or at least, at the very least, he was thinking of them as inferior people before then. So it seems that interracial couples were the thing that he had the biggest problem with, where the races were mixing. He didn't want that to happen. Now you're saying, Terry, what happened with the shooting of the 2 hitchhikers and the girl that he lived with and the other girl? Basically, he confessed to those. He was not charged with those. I don't know if it's because they didn't have enough evidence or because he already had 5 life sentences and a death sentence. Maybe they felt like that was just a waste of taxpayer money and time to go ahead and do that. I don't know. But these are the trials that he did have and the convictions that he did have. It is suspected that he murdered 21 plus people. He confessed to a lot of murders, but he was only convicted of the ones that I've told you about and sentenced. So yeah, this is a guy who you can't really blame the authorities for taking a while to catch up with him, because he operated all over the United States, from Pennsylvania to Chattanooga to Georgia to Utah and to Rockville, Maryland. So he really got around. But that is the story of Joseph Paul Franklin, a man that was consumed by hate, and to the point where he felt like he needed to wage this one-man war against races mixing and against Jews. But he paid for it in the end. He was indeed executed. So it's just sad. It's a very sad thing. It's a very sad that that much hate can take over a person's life to where they do something like that. And I don't know. It's just tragic. But that is the story of Joseph Paul Franklin. And you can look him up on the interwebs and find out more about him if you want to. There are some interviews with him on YouTube if you're interested in looking those up, where he expounds a little bit on his views. And I guess that's going to be it for this time. This one was kind of dark, I thought. Just because there was no rhyme or reason to it except they were the wrong color, the wrong race, the wrong ethnic group, the wrong whatever. He didn't know these people. He didn't have a disagreement with any of them. They were just inferior in his mind. I hope that you guys are doing okay. I hope that you are safe and you're taking care of each other. The next video will be an ASMR show and tell, so I hope you'll come back for that one. Please excuse me tripping over my tongue in this video. I haven't felt well for the past almost week, and so I was trying to get back into the flow of doing a video, and instead I just went blah 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 blah. But thank you for putting up with me and staying with me this long. Hope you guys have a great rest of the day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.